In the deepest reaches of the Andromeda Spiral, where three moons cast twisted shadows through alien forests, the Kythera hunting guild had never lost prey. For over 2,000 years, their crimson banners had marked the death of countless species across 100 worlds. Their trophies lined the halls of their fortress ships, the skulls of Rigelian warchiefs, the crystallized hearts of vegan crystal singers, the still-glowing neural cores of Centauri hive minds. But, today, for the first time in their blood-soaked history, they had marked something different. Something that didn't run when it should have. Something that watched them from shadows they couldn't see, learned their patterns while they thought themselves the hunters, and waited with a patience that spoke of evolutionary advantages they couldn't comprehend. They had marked a human as prey. They had no idea that in doing so, they had awakened something far more dangerous than anything in their trophy halls. Something that had survived ice ages, world wars, and the hostile expansion across the galaxy not through superior technology or overwhelming numbers, but through an ability that had made humans the apex predators of Earth long before they ever looked to the stars. The ability to hunt the hunters. And, high in the canopy of this alien world, Marcus Chen adjusted his position on a branch 60 meters above the forest floor, checked his improvised weapons one final time, and smiled with the cold satisfaction of a predator who had found worthy prey. The real hunt was about to begin. Marcus Chen had been watching the alien hunters for 3 days now, and they still had no idea he existed. From his position in the massive ironwood trees of Kepler 442b, he observed their camp through makeshift binoculars crafted from salvaged equipment. The Kythera moved with the arrogant confidence of apex predators who had never known true fear. Their sleek, reptilian forms stood nearly 8 feet tall, covered in natural armor plating that gleamed like polished obsidian. Each bore the crimson hunting marks of their guild, intricate scarification that told the story of their kills across the galaxy. Marcus counted 12 of them in total, spread across a clearing they had carved from the alien forest with plasma cutters. Their equipment was advanced beyond anything humanity had developed: portable foraging units that could break down local vegetation into nutritious paste, energy shields that shimmered around their perimeter, and weapons that hummed with barely contained power. At the center of their camp stood a ceremonial pole, already decorated with trophies from this hunt: the iridescent wing membranes of the local whisperbirds, the spiral horns of the great moss beasts, and, at the very top, a piece of torn fabric from Marcus's jacket. The sight of that cloth should have filled him with dread. Instead, it made him smile. The Kythera had found evidence of his presence 2 days ago when he had deliberately left his damaged jacket behind after their first encounter. They had tracked him, as he had wanted them to. They had studied his footprints, analyzed his scent, and catalogued every detail of his passage through their advanced sensors. They believed they understood him now: a single, frightened human, stumbling through their hunting preserve with primitive tools and desperate panic. They had no concept of how wrong they were. Marcus shifted his position carefully, his movements so slow and deliberate that the watching Kythera sentries never noticed the slight change in the canopy's shadow patterns. 3 days of observation had taught him their routines. The sentries changed positions every 2 hours, following a predictable rotation that left brief gaps in their coverage. Their leader, a massive female with golden scarification, conducted tactical briefings at dawn and dusk. Their technology, while advanced, relied on active scanning patterns that could be avoided if one understood their limitations. And Marcus understood them perfectly. The human had not always been a hunter. 6 months ago, he had been Dr. Marcus Chen, a xenobiologist studying the unique ecosystem of Kepler 442b as part of the Terran Colonial Survey. His research station had been a peaceful outpost of humanity's expansion into the galaxy, focused on understanding rather than conquering. Marcus had spent his days cataloging the incredible diversity of life on this world, from the microscopic symbionts that gave the ironwood trees their incredible strength to the massive aurora whales that migrated through the upper atmosphere. That peaceful existence had ended when the Kythera arrived. The hunting guild traveled from system to system, seeking out worlds with unique ecosystems and interesting prey. They were not conquerors or colonizers, they were sportsmen, in the cruelest sense of the word. They took only what they needed for trophies and moved on, leaving behind empty worlds stripped of their most magnificent life forms. The Terran Colonial Authority had no treaties with the Kythera, no diplomatic channels, no legal recourse. The hunters operated in the lawless regions between galactic powers, taking what they wanted from whoever was too weak to stop them. Marcus had tried to evacuate when the Kythera ships first appeared in the system. His emergency beacon had gone unanswered. The nearest human settlement was 3 weeks away by faster-than-light travel. His research station's defenses were designed to keep out curious wildlife, not dedicated hunters with military-grade equipment. When the Kythera found his base, they had given him a sporting head start and marked him for the hunt. That had been their first mistake. The second mistake had been assuming that a human would be easy prey. Marcus reached into his improvised pack and withdrew a small device he had been working on for the past 2 days. Built from salvaged components from his destroyed research station, the electromagnetic pulse generator was crude but functional. The Kythera's advanced technology was their greatest strength, but it was also their greatest vulnerability. They had become dependent on their sensors, their shields, their plasma weapons. Strip away their technology, even temporarily, and they became just another predator species in an alien forest. And, in an alien forest, Marcus had advantages they couldn't imagine. The human species had evolved on a world where everything was trying to kill them. Earth's biosphere was a constant battleground of predator and prey, where survival required not just strength or speed, but intelligence, adaptability, and the ability to turn any environment into a weapon. Humans had survived ice ages that killed off species with better natural armor. They had outlasted plague and famine through cooperation and ingenuity. They had become the dominant species on their world not because they were the strongest or fastest, but because they were the most dangerous when cornered. The Kythera were about to learn why Earth's children were called the galaxy's most adaptable species. As the alien sun began to set, casting long purple shadows through the forest, Marcus watched the Kythera begin their evening routine. The sentries took their positions. The camp's energy shields hummed to life. The hunters settled in for another night of confident rest, secure in their belief that they were the apex predators in this place. Marcus checked his improvised weapons one final time. The electromagnetic pulse generator. A crossbow built from salvaged metal and ironwood, its bolts tipped with a paralytic toxin he had extracted from the local thorncrawlers. A set of whisper bird calls that could mimic the forest's natural sounds. And, most importantly, detailed maps of the local terrain that he had memorized during months of peaceful research. The Kythera knew this forest as a hunting ground. Marcus knew it as a living ecosystem, every species and symbiotic relationship, every hidden cave and seasonal migration route. They saw obstacles to overcome. He saw tools to be used. As full darkness fell, Marcus began to move through the canopy with practiced silence. 3 days of watching had taught him the positions of their sensors. 2 weeks of survival in this forest had taught him how to move without disturbing the natural sounds of the night. And a lifetime of being human had taught him the most important lesson of all. The most dangerous predator was the one you never saw coming. Below him, the Kythera camp glowed with the soft light of their technology, a beacon of confidence in the alien darkness. Soon, very soon, that confidence would become their downfall. The hunt was about to begin, and, for the first time in their history, the Kythera were going to discover what it felt like to be prey. The attack began at exactly midnight, when the nocturnal howlcats started their territorial calls and the forest filled with natural sounds that would mask any artificial noise. Marcus descended from the canopy like a ghost, using a technique he had learned from watching the local glide spiders. His movements were deliberate and patient, each handhold tested before his weight shifted, each footstep placed with surgical precision. The Kythera's sensor grid was sophisticated, but it was designed to detect the thermal signatures and electrical fields of known species. It had never encountered anything like a human. The first sentry never knew what hit him. Marcus struck from behind, using a pressure point technique that would render the alien unconscious without triggering their armor's automatic distress beacon. The Kythera collapsed silently, their plasma rifle clattering softly into the undergrowth. Marcus quickly dragged the body into a dense thicket of thorncrawlers, where the natural electromagnetic fields would interfere with any tracking attempts. 1 down, 11 to go. The next phase of the plan required patience and perfect timing. Marcus had spent hours studying the patrol routes and communication protocols of the hunting party. The Kythera used a sophisticated check-in system, but, like all military procedures, it had predictable intervals and exploitable weaknesses. Each sentry reported their status every 15 minutes using a coded pulse transmission. Miss a check-in, and the entire camp would go to high alert. Marcus had exactly 14 minutes to position himself for the second strike. He moved through the undergrowth with the practiced stealth of someone who had spent months studying this ecosystem. Every plant, every sound, every scent pattern was familiar to him. The Kythera saw an alien forest full of unknown dangers. Marcus saw his childhood backyard, complete with hiding places and secret paths that only he knew existed. The second sentry was positioned near a cluster of resonance trees, whose natural harmonics would mask the sound of footsteps. Marcus approached from downwind, using the alien's own sophisticated sensors against them. The Kythera's enhanced hearing was acute, but it was calibrated for their homeworld's acoustic environment. The subtle differences in air density and humidity on Kepler 442b created slight blind spots in their auditory perception, gaps that Marcus had mapped during his days of observation. This sentry met the same fate as the first, but Marcus added a special touch. He carefully positioned the unconscious aliens so they appeared to be sleeping at their post, visible enough to be seen by the automated security systems but natural enough not to trigger an immediate alarm. To any casual observer, it would look like the warrior had dozed off during their watch. With two sentries neutralized, Marcus began the delicate work of positioning his improvised weapons around the camp's perimeter. The electromagnetic pulse generator went first, carefully concealed in a grove of flux willows whose natural bioelectric field would hide its energy signature. Next came a series of tripwires connected to containers of concentrated thorncrawler venom, positioned along the most likely escape routes from the camp. The beauty of this approach was its subtlety. The Kythera were expecting a desperate human to make panicked mistakes, to attack with crude weapons and obvious tactics. They were prepared for a fight, not a methodical dismantling of their technological advantages. As Marcus worked, he thought about the xenobiology lessons that had prepared him for this moment. Every species evolved survival strategies shaped by their environment and evolutionary pressures. The Kythera came from a world of open plains and clear sightlines, where superior technology and overwhelming force were the keys to hunting success. They were ambush predators in the sense that they could strike faster than their prey could escape, but they had never learned the patient, methodical hunting style that defined Earth's apex predators. Humans, on the other hand, had evolved on a world where being the biggest or strongest was often a disadvantage. Earth's most successful predators were those that could adapt, improvise, and turn their environment into a weapon. Pack hunters that could coordinate complex strategies across multiple individuals. Tool users that could extend their natural abilities with crafted implements. And, above all, persistence hunters that could outlast their prey through sheer endurance and determination. The Kythera were about to face all three advantages at once, embodied in a single human who had turned their hunting ground into his domain. The third phase of Marcus's plan required the most dangerous element: surprise. He needed to get close enough to the main camp to plant his electromagnetic pulse device without triggering their close-range sensors. This meant crossing an open area of nearly 20 meters, all under the observation of multiple automated security systems. Marcus had a solution for that problem, learned from his months of studying the local wildlife. The chameleon moths of Kepler 442b were one of the planet's most remarkable species. They could alter not just their visual appearance, but also their thermal signature and even their electrical field output to match their surroundings. Marcus had studied them extensively during his research, mapping the genetic mechanisms that controlled their adaptive camouflage. While he couldn't replicate their biological abilities, he could mimic their tactics. Marcus had spent the previous day coating his clothing with a mixture of local mud, plant extracts, and crushed chameleon moth scales. The resulting camouflage was crude compared to the moth's natural abilities, but it was effective enough to confuse sensors calibrated for detecting known species. More importantly, he had learned to move with the same patient, measured pace that allowed the moths to avoid triggering the motion detection instincts of their predators. The approach to the main camp took nearly an hour. Marcus moved inches at a time, freezing whenever the automated scanners swept in his direction, adjusting his breathing to match the natural rhythm of the forest's air currents. Every few minutes, he paused to listen for changes in the camp's activity patterns, ready to abort the mission if the unconscious sentries were discovered ahead of schedule. But the Kythera's confidence worked in his favor. They were so certain of their technological superiority that they never considered the possibility that their security systems might have blind spots. They trusted their sensors absolutely, never thinking that those same sensors might be turned against them by someone who understood their limitations. Marcus finally reached the perimeter of the main camp just as the first unconscious sentry missed their scheduled check-in. He heard the soft chime of an alarm from within the command shelter, followed by the sharp hiss of Kithara voices speaking in their native language. Through his studies of their behavior, Marcus had learned enough of their communication patterns to understand the basics of their conversation. The hunt leader was ordering a perimeter sweep. They had detected the missed check-in, but assumed it was a minor equipment malfunction or momentary lapse in discipline. 2 warriors were dispatched to investigate, while the rest of the hunting party remained in the camp. This was exactly what Marcus had been hoping for. As the investigation team departed, Marcus activated his electromagnetic pulse generator. The device sent out a carefully calibrated burst of electromagnetic energy, designed to overload the camp's electronic systems without creating a visible explosion or obvious attack signature. To the Kithara, it would appear as if their equipment had suffered a cascade failure, possibly triggered by interaction with the planet's unique electromagnetic field. The effect was immediate and devastating. The camp's energy shields flickered and died. Emergency lighting failed throughout the compound. Communication systems went offline, leaving the hunting party isolated from their orbiting ships. Most critically, the environmental suits that protected the Kithara from the planet's exotic atmosphere began to malfunction, forcing them to rely on emergency backup systems with limited duration. In the space of 30 seconds, Marcus had reduced the most advanced hunting party in the galaxy to a group of confused aliens stumbling around in the dark, cut off from their technology and their support systems. Now the real hunt could begin. Marcus drew his improvised crossbow and settled into position, watching as the Kithara struggled to understand what had happened to their carefully organized camp. They moved with increasing panic, their natural predator instincts undermined by their dependence on technology. Some tried to restart their equipment. Others called out to the missing sentries, their voices carrying clearly through the night air. None of them thought to look up into the trees, where a human crouched with the patience of a species that had spent millennia learning to hunt the hunters. The next phase would be more direct. Marcus had neutralized their technological advantages and isolated them from their support systems. Now it was time to show them what a human could do when the playing field was level. As the first Kithara warrior stepped into range of his crossbow, Marcus allowed himself a cold smile. The alien hunters had marked him as prey, expecting to add his skull to their trophy collection. They were about to discover that they had made a fundamental error in species identification. Marcus Chen was not prey. He was the thing that prey became when it refused to die. The first crossbow bolt took the Kithara warrior in the shoulder joint, where their natural armor was weakest. The paralytic toxin from the thorncrawlers worked quickly, spreading through their nervous system and dropping them to the ground within seconds. The alien didn't even have time to cry out before unconsciousness claimed them. Marcus was already moving before the body hit the ground. He swung through the canopy with practiced ease, using vines and branches that he had tested during his reconnaissance. Below him, the remaining Kithara hunters were beginning to realize that their equipment failure was not an accident. Their leader, the massive female with golden scarification, barked orders in their native tongue while her warriors formed a defensive circle around the camp's center. But they were defending against the wrong kind of attack. Marcus had spent years studying predator behavior across dozens of worlds. The Kithara were pack hunters in the traditional sense. They worked together to overwhelm their prey through superior numbers and coordination. Their tactics assumed that enemies would attack from ground level, using conventional weapons and predictable strategies. They had never encountered a persistence predator that attacked from multiple vectors simultaneously. The second bolt came from a completely different angle, fired from a position 40 meters from the first shot. Another warrior dropped, clutching their neck as the toxin shut down their voluntary motor functions. This time, the reaction was immediate and violent. Plasma bolts seared through the forest canopy, turning ancient ironwood trees into columns of superheated gas. Energy weapons swept back and forth, searching for a target that was no longer where they expected it to be. Marcus had already relocated again, using a network of prepared positions that he had established during his days of observation. Each firing point offered multiple escape routes and clear lines of sight to different areas of the camp. More importantly, each position was designed to draw return fire away from his actual location, forcing the Kithara to waste ammunition on shadows and false targets. The psychological effect was more devastating than the physical casualties. The Kithara were experiencing something they had never encountered in 2,000 years of hunting intelligent fear. Their prey was fighting back with tactics they didn't understand, using weapons they couldn't predict, striking from positions they couldn't locate. For the first time in their species' history, they were the ones being hunted. Marcus's third shot missed its intended target but served its purpose anyway. The bolt embedded itself in a flux willow tree directly behind the Kithara formation, forcing them to turn and divide their attention. In their panic, they made the classic mistake of inexperienced prey. They bunched together for comfort, creating a concentrated target instead of spreading out to minimize casualties. The fourth shot didn't miss. The hunt leader herself took a bolt in the leg, the toxin immediately beginning to affect her coordination. She stumbled but remained standing, her natural constitution giving her more resistance to the paralytic than her subordinates. Marcus had expected this. The leader was clearly the largest and most physically capable member of the hunting party, which meant she would require a higher dosage to neutralize. He had prepared accordingly. The fifth and sixth shots came in rapid succession, both aimed at the wounded leader. The first bolt struck her in the arm, the second in her torso. The combined dosage of toxin finally overwhelmed her system, sending the massive alien crashing to the ground like a felled tree. With their leader down, the remaining Kithara hunters lost all semblance of tactical discipline. Some fired wildly into the forest, hoping to hit their invisible attacker through volume of fire. Others tried to drag their fallen comrades to safety, making themselves easy targets in the process. A few attempted to flee the camp entirely, only to trigger the tripwire traps that Marcus had positioned along the escape routes. The trap mechanisms were elegant in their simplicity. Each wire was connected to a spring-loaded launcher that would spray concentrated thorn-crawler venom over a wide area. The fleeing Kithara ran directly into clouds of paralytic toxin, their momentum carrying them several steps before the neurotoxin took effect and sent them tumbling to the ground. Within 10 minutes of the first shot, 8 of the original 12 Kithara were unconscious or paralyzed. The remaining 4 had taken shelter behind their disabled equipment, using plasma rifles to create a defensive perimeter around their position. They were trapped, but they were also desperate, which made them dangerous. Marcus paused his assault to consider his options. He could continue picking them off one by one, but doing so would require exposing himself to their concentrated fire. The paralytic toxin was effective, but he had a limited supply of bolts, and the remaining Kithara would be expecting his attacks now. They might not be able to locate him, but they could make movement in the canopy extremely hazardous. More importantly, Marcus realized he was beginning to enjoy the hunt too much. That realization brought him up short. He was a xenobiologist, not a soldier. His goal was survival, not revenge. The logical thing to do would be to withdraw, let the paralytic toxin wear off the unconscious aliens, and hope they would leave the planet rather than continue the hunt. He had demonstrated that humans were more dangerous prey than they had anticipated. Honor might be satisfied. But, as Marcus watched the remaining Kithara huddled behind their makeshift barricade, he remembered the trophy pole at the center of their camp. The whisper bird wing membranes, torn from creatures that had never harmed anyone. The moss beast horns, taken from gentle herbivores that posed no threat to anyone. And, at the top, his own jacket, the first step in what was supposed to be his transformation from living being to hunting trophy. These aliens weren't just predators. They were collectors, taking life for the sheer pleasure of possession. They traveled from world to world, stripping away the most magnificent examples of local evolution and leaving empty ecosystems in their wake. They had been doing this for 2,000 years, and they had never faced consequences for their actions. Marcus checked his remaining crossbow bolts. 6 shots left, 4 targets to neutralize. The math was in his favor, but only if he could maintain the element of surprise. He needed a new strategy. The solution came to him as he observed the Kythera's defensive position. They had taken shelter behind their disabled communication array, a complex piece of equipment that still contained significant amounts of stored energy even though its main systems were offline. If that energy could be released suddenly, it would create a significant distraction, possibly even a localized explosion that would disorient his remaining targets. Marcus reached into his pack and withdrew a small device he had originally built for geological sampling. The seismic charge was designed to create controlled vibrations for studying planetary composition, but, with some modifications, it could serve a very different purpose. He carefully adjusted the device's frequency to match the resonant properties of the Kythera communication array, then began moving into position for the final assault. This maneuver required more direct exposure than any of his previous attacks. Marcus had to descend from the relative safety of the canopy and approach the Kythera position from ground level, using what little cover was available in the devastated campsite. Every step brought him closer to the aliens' weapons, any of which could reduce him to constituent atoms with a single direct hit. But humans had one advantage that no amount of advanced technology could replicate: the ability to move with deliberate purpose even when afraid, to make calculated decisions even under extreme stress, to continue fighting even when the odds were overwhelmingly against them. It was the same quality that had allowed his species to survive ice ages, world wars, and the hostile expansion into a galaxy that seemed determined to kill them. Marcus placed the seismic charge against the communication array and activated its timer. 30 seconds to get clear of the blast radius and position himself for the follow-up attack. He moved with smooth efficiency, every motion planned and practiced, despite the plasma bolts that seared the air around him as the Kythera detected his approach. 20 seconds. Marcus reached his predetermined firing position and drew his crossbow. The remaining Kythera were now fully aware of his location, their weapons tracking his movement with deadly precision. But they were also focused on the immediate threat, which meant they weren't watching for the secondary attack. 10 seconds. Marcus drew back the crossbow string and aimed at the closest target. The alien was partially concealed behind the equipment, but enough of their torso was visible for a clean shot. The paralytic toxin would handle the rest. 5 seconds. The lead Kythera realized what was about to happen and tried to scramble away from the communication array. Too late. 0. The seismic charge detonated with a sharp crack that echoed through the forest like thunder. The communication array exploded in a shower of sparks and superheated metal, temporarily blinding the aliens and filling the air with electromagnetic interference that disrupted their remaining equipment. Marcus fired 4 bolts in rapid succession, each one finding its mark with mechanical precision. The paralytic toxin spread through the aliens' systems as they collapsed one by one, their weapons falling silent as unconsciousness claimed them. And then, for the first time in hours, the forest was quiet. Marcus stood in the center of the devastated Kythera camp, surrounded by 12 unconscious aliens who had marked him for death. His improvised weapons had proved more effective than their advanced technology. His understanding of the local ecosystem had given him advantages they couldn't counter. His human persistence and adaptability had turned their own hunting ground against them. But, as he looked at the trophy pole with its collection of stolen lives, Marcus realized that the real hunt was just beginning. The Kythera were not just individual hunters, they were representatives of a culture that had been preying on the galaxy for millennia. These 12 aliens were just the advance team. Somewhere in orbit above Kepler 442b, their ships waited for word of the hunt's success. When that word didn't come, they would send reinforcements. And, when those reinforcements arrived, they would find something waiting for them that they had never encountered before. A human who was no longer content to simply survive. A human who had decided to hunt back. Marcus spent the next 18 hours preparing for war. The unconscious Kythera would remain paralyzed for approximately 6 hours, giving him a limited window to work before they began to recover. He moved with methodical efficiency, stripping their equipment and studying their technology for weaknesses he could exploit. The plasma rifles were biometrically locked, but their power cells could be removed and repurposed. The communication devices were too complex to fully understand, but their components included useful materials for improvised weapons. Most importantly, he found their transportation. Hidden beneath active camouflage shields, 3 Kythera scout vehicles sat in a clearing 2 kilometers from the main camp. The hovercrafts were sleek, predatory things, designed for rapid deployment and quick extraction after a successful hunt. Their hulls were armored against small arms fire, and their engines could maintain flight even in the dense atmosphere of a heavy-gravity world. Under normal circumstances, the vehicles would be impossible for a human to operate. Their control systems were designed for Kythera physiology, their interfaces calibrated for alien sensory input. But Marcus was not operating under normal circumstances, and he was no longer thinking like a scientist. He was thinking like a human who had decided to survive at any cost. The first modification was the simplest. Marcus removed the biometric locks from the vehicle's control systems using techniques he had learned from studying the paralyzed hunters. Kythera security was sophisticated, but it was designed to prevent theft by other Kythera, not infiltration by a completely alien intelligence. Their palm print scanners could be fooled by careful molds taken from unconscious operators. Their retinal scanners could be bypassed by redirecting their sensor inputs to stored data files. Within 4 hours, Marcus had functional control over all 3 scout vehicles. The second modification was more complex. The Kythera hovercraft were designed as hunting platforms, equipped with tracking sensors and capture systems rather than heavy weapons. Marcus needed to transform them into something more dangerous, something that could threaten the orbital ships that would inevitably come looking for the missing hunting party. He began by removing non-essential systems and replacing them with improvised weapons. The capture nets became delivery systems for concentrated thorncrawler venom. The tracking sensors were rewired to detect and target the energy signatures of Kythera technology. The emergency beacons were turned into electromagnetic pulse generators, capable of disrupting enemy equipment at short range. But the most important modification was also the most dangerous. Each hovercraft carried an emergency self-destruct system, designed to prevent the vehicles from falling into enemy hands if a hunt went wrong. The charges were small but highly sophisticated, shaped to maximize damage to the craft's critical systems while minimizing collateral destruction. Marcus carefully removed these charges and began building something entirely different. If the Kythera wanted to hunt him from orbit, he would give them a target they couldn't resist. As the alien sun began to rise on his second day of preparation, Marcus heard the distant rumble of atmospheric entry. The reinforcements had arrived, exactly as he had predicted. Through improvised optics salvaged from the Kythera equipment, he watched 3 sleek ships descend through the planet's cloud layer, their hulls glowing with the heat of rapid deceleration. The ships were larger than the scout vessels, clearly designed for extended hunting expeditions rather than quick raids. Their weapon systems were visible even from a distance: massive energy cannons that could reduce entire city blocks to vapor, missile launchers loaded with guided projectiles, defensive shields that shimmered like soap bubbles around their hulls. Against such firepower, a lone human with improvised weapons should have had no chance whatsoever. Marcus smiled as he watched them land. The Kythera reinforcements followed predictable protocols as they deployed from their ships. Advanced scouts spread out to secure the landing zone. Communication specialists attempted to contact the missing hunting party. Heavy weapons teams established defensive perimeters around their vessels. All exactly as Marcus had expected them to do. The beauty of his plan lay in its simplicity. The Kythera were technologically advanced, but they were also predictable. Their tactics had worked successfully for 2,000 years, which meant they had never needed to adapt or innovate. They followed the same deployment patterns, used the same communication frequencies, made the same assumptions about their enemies' capabilities. Marcus had spent hours studying their procedures through captured equipment manuals. He knew how they would respond to the discovery of their paralyzed hunting party. He knew which landing zones they would choose based on tactical considerations. Most importantly, he knew exactly how they would react when they realized that their prey had turned predator. The trap was elegant in its psychological manipulation. When the Kythera advanced scouts found their unconscious comrades, they would assume they had encountered some form of indigenous threat. The paralytic toxin would appear to be a natural defense mechanism, possibly from the thorncrawlers or another local species. The destroyed equipment would be attributed to the planet's hostile electromagnetic environment. But, when they found Marcus's calling card, their perspective would change entirely. He had left the message exactly where their advance scouts would find it, carved into the trophy pole at the center of the devastated camp. Written in standard galactic script using a Kithara cutting tool, the words were simple and direct. The hunt continues. Come find me. Dr. Marcus Chan, human. Below the message, he had added his own trophy, a severed piece of Kithara armor plating, taken from their fallen leader and marked with a crude but recognizable human symbol. Let them understand that their prey had claimed its own prize. The psychological effect would be devastating. For the first time in their species' history, the Kithara would be forced to confront the possibility that they were not the apex predators they believed themselves to be. Doubt would creep into their tactical planning. Fear would influence their decision-making. And fear, Marcus knew, made even the most dangerous predators vulnerable. He watched through his improvised optics as the Kithara forces discovered the message. Even from a distance, he could see the change in their body language as the words sank in. Rapid gestures indicated heated discussion among the command staff. Weapons were checked and rechecked. Sensor sweeps intensified as they searched for signs of their missing prey. But they were looking in the wrong place. Marcus was no longer hiding in the forest canopy, waiting to be hunted. He was 50 kilometers away, using their own scout vehicles to establish observation posts and weapons emplacements across the landing zone's perimeter. When they finally decided to track him down, they would be entering terrain that he had spent the last day turning into a death trap. The first phase of the counterattack began at noon, when the Kithara sent out their tracking teams. Marcus allowed them to find his trail. The signs were obvious enough: crude campsites, discarded equipment, even a few false leads that would send the hunters in circles for hours. He wanted them to follow, wanted them to believe that he was still running scared through the alien forest. The tracking teams moved with professional competence, but also with the arrogance that had defined their species for millennia. They expected to corner a frightened human within hours. They prepared for a quick, decisive engagement that would end with another trophy for their collection. Instead, they walked into carefully prepared kill zones. The first team triggered a modified Kithara mine that Marcus had reprogrammed to target their own energy signatures. The explosion sent them tumbling into a ravine where concentrated thorncrawler venom waited in aerosol form. They were unconscious before they hit the bottom. The second team found themselves caught between converging electromagnetic pulse generators that shut down their equipment and left them stumbling blind through terrain that Marcus had seeded with contact paralytic. They managed to call for help before the toxin took effect, but their rescue team walked into the same trap 20 minutes later. The third team was eliminated by their own scout vehicle, which Marcus had reprogrammed and sent back to base with a cargo of improvised explosives. The blast took out their communications array and scattered their formation, leaving individual hunters isolated and vulnerable to crossbow attacks from concealed positions. By evening, the Kithara had lost over half their ground forces without ever seeing their target. But Marcus was just getting started. As darkness fell over Kepler 442b, he began the final phase of his plan. The orbital ships were still in their landing positions, their crews confident that their ground forces would soon locate and eliminate the troublesome human. They had no idea that their prey had spent the day positioning salvaged self-destruct charges around their vessel's vulnerable points. The charges were small, but they didn't need to be large. Marcus had studied the ship's construction through captured technical manuals, identifying the critical systems that kept the massive vessels functional. A precisely placed explosion at the right moment could cripple a starship just as effectively as a direct hit from a capital-class weapon. At midnight, when the nocturnal howlcats began their territorial calls and the forest filled with masking sound, Marcus triggered the charges simultaneously. 3 explosions lit up the alien night as the Kithara ships lost power, life support, and communication systems all at once. Emergency lighting flickered and died. Atmospheric processors went offline, forcing the crews to rely on emergency suits. Most critically, their weapons and defensive systems shut down, leaving the vessels as vulnerable as beached whales. In the space of 30 seconds, Marcus had transformed the most feared hunting fleet in the galaxy into a collection of disabled derelicts. But he still wasn't finished. As emergency teams scrambled to restore their ship's systems, they found something waiting for them in the darkness around their vessels. Something that moved with inhuman patience and struck with calculated precision. Something that picked off their repair crews one by one, using weapons they couldn't track and tactics they couldn't counter. Something that had learned to hunt the hunters. By dawn, the surviving Kythera were barricaded inside their crippled ships, afraid to venture outside and unable to repair their vessels without exposing themselves to attack. They had come to claim a human trophy, but instead found themselves trapped on an alien world by prey that had refused to play by their rules. And, high in the ironwood trees surrounding their landing zone, Marcus Chen prepared for the final act of his hunt. The Kythera had marked him as prey, but they had fundamentally misunderstood what that meant. Humans had spent millions of years learning that the most dangerous prey was the kind that refused to die quietly. The siege lasted 3 days. Marcus could have ended it sooner, but he wanted the survivors to understand what they were facing. For 2 millennia, the Kythera had terrorized the galaxy's weaker species with impunity, secure in their belief that superior technology and ruthless efficiency made them untouchable. They had never been forced to confront their own mortality, never experienced the helpless fear that defined the existence of their prey. Now, trapped in their disabled ships with dwindling supplies and failing life support, they were finally learning what it felt like to be hunted by something more dangerous than themselves. Marcus maintained his pressure with surgical precision. During the day, he picked off anyone who ventured outside the ships, using paralytic crossbow bolts fired from positions they couldn't locate. At night, he sabotaged their repair efforts, destroying tools and equipment with carefully placed explosive charges. Most psychologically devastating of all, he used their own communication systems against them, broadcasting messages that arrived without any detectable transmission source. Day 2 of your education, his voice echoed through their emergency speakers. Your ships are dying around you, just like the creatures on your trophy poles. The difference is that your prey never had a choice. You do. Leave this world, and never return. Continue the hunt, and learn what the whisperbirds felt when you tore off their wings. The psychological warfare was devastatingly effective. The Kythera were experiencing something their species had never encountered: doubt about their own supremacy. Some argued for immediate evacuation, abandoning their damaged ships and calling for rescue from their homeworld. Others demanded a final assault on the humans' position, driven by pride and the need to salvage their reputation. But they couldn't locate Marcus's position, and they couldn't mount an assault without functioning equipment. Their leader, a grizzled veteran named Warsinger Kawaiti, finally made the decision that Marcus had been waiting for. On the morning of the 4th day, a modified emergency beacon began broadcasting from the largest ship. The message was simple, transmitted in standard galactic script to ensure that any human receiving it would understand. We propose terms for ending this conflict. Marcus allowed himself a moment of satisfaction before responding. He had driven the galaxy's most feared hunters to the negotiating table using nothing but improvised weapons and tactical superiority. But he also knew that this was the most dangerous moment of the entire operation. Cornered predators were unpredictable, and the Kythera still had access to their ship's self-destruct systems. If they decided to take him with them in a final act of spite, there would be little he could do to stop them. He approached the landing zone with extreme caution, using every stealth technique he had learned during his days of preparation. The Kythera could be offering genuine surrender, or they could be luring him into a trap. Given their species' history of deception and betrayal, the latter seemed more likely. But, as Marcus reached the perimeter of their defensive positions, he realized that something fundamental had changed in the aliens' behavior. The sentries posted around their ships were nervous, constantly checking their surroundings and jumping at every sound. Their weapons were held with the desperate grip of beings who no longer trusted their own superiority. Most tellingly, they had abandoned their traditional hunting formation in favor of a tight defensive circle that spoke of prey animals rather than apex predators. Warsinger Kawaiti himself stood at the center of the landing zone, his ornate armor dimmed by several days of emergency power conservation. The massive alien's golden scarification seemed faded, his posture subtly different from the arrogant confidence Marcus had observed in their initial encounters. This was not the same creature who had marked a human for sport just a week ago. Dr. Marcus Chen, the warsinger's voice carried clearly through the thin air, his pronunciation of human words careful and precise. You have demonstrated capabilities that our intelligence files did not predict. We acknowledge that our assessment of your species was incomplete. Marcus remained hidden in the forest's edge, his crossbow loaded and ready. Trust was a luxury that neither species could afford in this situation. But he was curious to hear what the alien had to say. We offer you the following terms, KYTHSR continued. Immediate cessation of hostilities. Complete withdrawal from this system within 7 standard days. Reparations for damage to your research station. And, most significantly, revision of our species classification database to mark humans as non-prey entities. The offer was more than Marcus had dared hope for, but he recognized it for what it was: a strategic retreat disguised as negotiation. The Kithara weren't admitting defeat, they were buying time to develop new tactics for dealing with humans. Give them a few years to study his techniques, and they would return with countermeasures. Marcus stepped out of the forest, his weapon lowered but ready. He wanted KYTHSR to see his face when he delivered his response. Your terms are insufficient, he said simply. The warsinger's eyes widened with what Marcus recognized as genuine surprise. In 2,000 years of hunting, the Kithara had never encountered prey that rejected an offer of survival. What do you require? KYTHSR asked carefully. Complete cessation of hunting activities in this sector of the galaxy. Dismantling of your trophy collection and return of all specimens to their homeworlds. Public acknowledgement that your species' hunting practices constitute genocide under galactic law. And, most importantly, immediate broadcast of this entire encounter to every civilized world in known space. The silence that followed was profound. Marcus could see the alien leader processing the implications of those demands. What he was asking for wasn't just surrender, it was the complete destruction of Kithara hunting culture and their reputation as apex predators. You ask us to destroy ourselves, KYTHSR said finally. I'm asking you to evolve, Marcus replied. Your species has great potential for scientific advancement, exploration, even artistic achievement. You've wasted it all on the systematic slaughter of beings who couldn't defend themselves. That ends now, or you don't leave this world. The warsinger looked around at his disabled ships, his scattered forces, and the human who had single-handedly dismantled their entire operation. When he spoke again, his voice carried the weight of absolute defeat. The Hunting Guild will never accept these terms. If we return with such a message, we will be stripped of all rank and exiled from our homeworld. Our families will bear the shame of our failure for generations. That's not my problem, Marcus said coldly. Your people have a choice. Adapt to a galaxy where your former prey can fight back or become extinct. Evolution doesn't care about your pride. The negotiation continued for several hours, but the outcome was never really in doubt. The Kithara were trapped between impossible alternatives. Accepting Marcus's terms would destroy their culture, but refusing them would result in their immediate death on Kepler 442b. In the end, survival won out over pride. Warsinger KYTHSR formally surrendered his hunting fleet and agreed to broadcast the complete record of their defeat to every world in the Galactic Communications Network. The message would travel at faster than light speeds, reaching hundreds of civilizations within days and thousands more within weeks. For the first time in galactic history, a hunting expedition had not only failed but been completely reversed. The predators had become prey, and their prey had proved more dangerous than anything in their trophy collections. As the Kithara began their repairs under Marcus's watchful supervision, he allowed himself to consider the broader implications of what had happened. This wasn't just about one human surviving against impossible odds. It was about the fundamental balance of power in a galaxy where strength had always been measured by technological superiority and ruthless efficiency. The news of a single human defeating an entire Kithara hunting fleet would spread like wildfire through the galactic community. Other predator species would begin to question their own assumptions about prey versus hunter dynamics. Weaker civilizations would realize that resistance was possible, that their tormentors were not invincible. Most importantly, humanity would no longer be seen as easy targets for exploitation. Marcus had bought his species something invaluable: time and reputation. The galaxy's predators would think twice before marking humans as prey, and that hesitation might be enough for humanity to develop the defenses needed to survive in this hostile universe. 3 days later, the Kythera ships lifted off from Kepler 442b under emergency power, their crews subdued and their leader broadcasting his defeat to the galaxy. Marcus watched them disappear into the star-filled void, knowing that he had changed something fundamental about humanity's place among the stars. He also knew that this was only the beginning. Other hunters would come, drawn by the challenge of defeating the human who had humbled the mighty Kythera. They would arrive with better preparation, more advanced weapons, and detailed studies of his tactics. Each encounter would be more dangerous than the last. But they would also find something waiting for them that hadn't existed before their first attack. They would find a human who understood that survival in this galaxy required more than hiding among the trees and hoping to be overlooked. They would find a human who had learned to hunt back. Marcus returned to his research station and began preparing for the next assault. He had work to do, turning this world into a fortress that could protect not just himself, but any human who might follow in his footsteps. The galaxy's predators had marked humanity as prey, but they had made a fundamental error in their assessment. Humans had not survived millions of years of evolution by being easy prey. They had survived by being the most dangerous thing their predators ever encountered. And now, for the first time since humanity had reached for the stars, the galaxy's hunters would learn what their ancestors had discovered in Earth's ancient forests. The most terrifying predator was the one you never saw coming, the one that turned your own hunt against you, the one that waited in the shadows until you made the mistake of thinking you were safe. The most terrifying predator was the one that refused to die quietly. And Marcus Chan, xenobiologist turned apex predator, settled into his watchtower among the ironwood trees to wait for the next hunter who thought humans would make easy prey. He had all the time in the world, and he had learned patience from the very best teachers. After all, humans had spent millennia hunting creatures far more dangerous than a few arrogant aliens with advanced technology. Now it was the galaxy's turn to learn why Earth's children were called survivors.